The first thing you're gonna do is remove both your rear wheels and tires. Once you've done this, you're gonna disconnect your shock from the trailing arm and then your sway bar link from the sway bar. After you've done that, go ahead and remove your radius arms from your trailing arm. Just want to pick up on the trailing arm, pull your bolts out. And we're just going to let our radius arms hang and we're going to stick our hardware back through. That way we don't lose our bushings. We'll just start the bolts, let them hang. And just kind of tilt your trailing arm out a little bit. Make sure your shock's zipping out of the way. Drop it down. Put your hardware in it. Let it hang as well. And we're going to go ahead and disconnect the brake caliper. Once the hardware is removed, go ahead and remove the brake caliper. Lay it up and out of the way. Then you'll want to remove your cotter pin from your castle nut, and then your castle nut. I'm just going to pick up on our trailing arm. Wiggle our hub off. This will be a little bit easier if you don't have a long travel kit. We're running a long travel kit, so as soon as we take them shocks off, the suspension wants to go all the way down. So we'll just go ahead and disconnect it. Move the hub and grab our axle. Pull it out of the transmission, just like that. Make sure your caliper's laying like this. You don't want it to be hanging on that brake line too hard. Now repeat all these steps for the passenger side. Then we're gonna go through, remove our clamp, or loosen our clamp, that way we can pull our vent tube off our clutch cover. Remove all our hardware for the clutch cover. And then we'll go ahead and remove it. Now we're gonna remove the bolt from our primary clutch, as well as our secondary clutch. Start with the primary here. Go ahead and remove the bolt from the secondary. And we're going to go ahead and remove the belt just to make it that much easier to get the clutches off. We have our tool right out of our factory toolkit. We'll just want to thread it in here until it spreads the secondary sheaths apart. Just want to get it as wide as it can be. Then we'll just want to roll our belt right off the secondary. Once you have it off the secondary, you can slide it off the primary. You can just let it lay there because we're going to pull the primary off too. Then we're going to remove our belt removal tool from the secondary clutch. Just unthread it all the way out of there. Then we're going to remove this snap ring right here. We'll remove our washers. And we'll just grab our secondary and slide it straight off. And it's very important that you keep the secondary together. Make sure you don't lose any of your washers or your snap rings. And we're going to pull our shock back up out of the way. We're going to grab our primary clutch puller, which one of these can be purchased from SuperATV.com. We're going to thread it right into the primary. Thread it in there. We'll grab our socket and our impact. We'll just go ahead and tighten it up. It should just pull right off of the crankshaft. We'll remove our primary clutch. And it's very important that you leave this belt exactly how it was. You don't want to flip it around whenever you reinstall it. That could cause vibration and cause your clutch not to function properly, make the belt slip. So we're just going to sit this primary down on the ground exactly how we pulled it out. Then we're going to go ahead and start removing all 4 of the Allen headed screws in the prop shaft. So once you've removed all 4 Allen-headed screws out of the prop shaft, you'll just want to separate the flange. Just want to grab it. Should be able to wiggle it and get it to slide forward just a little bit here. And once you've slid it off the flange, you're good to go. It'll just sit just like that, and then whenever we go to pull the transmission, we'll just wiggle it right past it. So now we're going to remove these 6 screws. We have 3 Torx and then 3 10mm. We'll go ahead and remove those now. So now we're going to remove the bolts securing the clutch cover to the transmission as well as the motor. Now you can do this by yourself. It is a little bit easier if you have somebody to help you. If you are doing it by yourself, you're going to have, you know, a pretty big wingspan to reach around over here, and you'll put a wrench on your bolt, and you're going to reach around to the other side with the socket, and then just remove the bolt or remove the nut off the bolt. You don't want to remove any of these bolts just yet. 2 of the bolts are going to go through the motor mount in between the motor and transmission. Then the other 2 are going to be bolted to the transmission. Now that we have all our nuts removed off of all our bolts, we want to take a pry bar and stick it up underneath the engine, pick up on it a little bit, and then we're going to come over here to the opposite side. And as we're picking up, we're going to remove our bolts. Just want to wiggle it around until you get all your bolts out. And just be mindful that as soon as you pull the last bolt out, this inner clutch cover is going to want to come off as well. So we're just going to leave our pry bar up underneath the transmission for just a minute here. And we're just going to grab this inner clutch cover, slide it off. You'll just want to move anything that's in the way, out of the way. And we'll take our inner clutch cover and we'll set it aside. Then we're going to head on over here to the passenger side and start undoing some wiring. So we're going to go ahead and disconnect all the wires. We're going to disconnect this connection right here. There'll be a connection back up underneath here on the back side. Disconnect that one. And then we'll come in here and cut any zip ties. The transmission's been out before. It probably has zip ties on it. This one has been, so it's got zip ties holding it on to the transmission. If you have push pins, you'll just want to pry those out with a push pin removal tool. So then we'll just pull our wiring back and just keep it out of the way. And then we're going to come right here on our shift linkage. Remove this pin. You may have to get a pair of needle nose pliers or a flathead, something just stick in there, pry it off. And then when you remove this pin, there's going to be a few different shims. You want to make sure that you catch all those. See right here, we got our shims. And then there's going to be this piece on the inside. After you remove this, you want to make sure you have all of these. You don't want to lose them. I like to go ahead and just remove it all and set it all aside. That way, whenever we're pulling the transmission out, we don't drop anything. So once we've removed the shift cable off of the transmission, you'll just want to back this nut off, just one turn. Only this nut right here, the one that's closest to the engine. And once you've done that, you can just grab your cable and slide it right out. And just set it off to the side. And you want to make sure that you don't touch that nut. You want to leave it so that way whenever you reinstall your transmission, you don't have to make any adjustments at all. Next, we're going to disconnect the vent tube from the transmission and then lay it up out of the way towards the motor. Then we're going to remove the 7 bolts, the 3 on the transmission side, and the 3 nuts on the frame side of the rear transmission mount, and then separate the mount from the bracket. So we'll go ahead and get in here, take this vent tube off real quick. So once you've removed all your hardware from your rear mount, the mount will just slide right out, and then we're going to go ahead and remove the transmission. We're just going to rotate it as we're picking up. just slide it right out. So now you're going to want to go through, clean the transmission, take an air blower, blow it off, brake clean it. Just make sure you don't get any brake clean inside of any of your connections on the transmission, and be careful as you're moving it around. We've already done this, so we're going to go ahead and remove the shift lever off of the transmission right here. Once you remove the nut, just wiggle it around. Once we've removed our selector, then we're going to remove the clip off of this right here. We've already done it, so we're just going to pull it straight up. We'll set that aside, and we'll go through and remove all 5 of these bolts. Then what you're going to have to do is take a small screwdriver and get up underneath the lip right here. Now you have to take a bigger one. I'm gonna start prying straight up. It does have a bunch of silicone on it, so it will kind of be stuck there on you a little bit. And you'll just remove this, slide it straight up. Make sure all your components stay together. And we'll set this aside. And we'll come in here. We'll remove this, as well as this here. And then this spring. You need to be careful whenever you take that off of there, because sometimes this spring will jump right up and out, and it'll fly across the floor and you'll lose it. And grab this gear right here, remove it as well. And all of these gears are splined, so you can't really mess it up. You just need to be careful, make sure you're inspecting everything as you go to make sure it's all correct, nothing's damaged. And now we're going to remove all of the bolts securing the case halves together. So once all the bolts are removed, there's going to be 3 spots on this transmission that you can take a pry bar, a screwdriver, anything like that, stick it in between the 2 case halves, pry up, and just work it around all the way. There'll be one here, one right here, and then one right here. So all I did was took a pry bar, put it in there, worked it here, came over here, worked it a little bit, worked it again, and then it split. So our case is split now, so all we're gonna do is just grab it, pick straight up. We're just gonna sit this side of the case down, just like that. And now our transmission is fully exposed. We got it all opened up here. So now we're just gonna go through and start inspecting everything, to see if there's anything damaged, anything broke, anything, if you need to order a bearing or any parts. Now that we've inspected everything, everything's looking good in our transmission. We hope everything's good in yours as well. So we're gonna go ahead to the next step. We're gonna grab a hold of the shift drum, which will be this piece right here, and the shift fork. So on this shift fork, it has a spring. You can actually pick up on it. So what you're gonna wanna do is pick straight up, wiggle the shift drum out, set it aside, grab the shift fork, pull it out, set it aside, just exactly how it came out, just to make it that much easier. Then we're gonna reach around here and we're gonna grab a hold of our idler gear. We're gonna remove it. We're gonna sit it down just as it came out. And we're gonna grab a hold of our big shaft here. You may have to tap on a little bit to get it to come out. Just be easy on that seal. We'll sit that down as well. Now we're gonna grab a hold of these 2 gear sets here, this one and this one. We're gonna pull them up simultaneously. You just have to wiggle it back and forth a little bit. Then they'll both come out. And this one, we can sit over here on the left side. Just remember exactly how it came out. It was just like this. And then this side is the one that we're gonna wanna remove the lower bearing. So this is how it came out of the transmission. It was sitting in there just like that. What we're gonna do is we're just gonna flip it upside down. So now we're gonna take this bearing off right here. In order to do that, you're gonna need a bearing puller. If you don't have one, you can pick one up from a local hardware store. You can rent them. And you'll just want to loosen your bearing puller up until you can get it around this bearing right here. Slide that in there just like that. And you want to make sure that the side that has the groove, just like this, is going underneath the bearing. So we'll get it in there, we'll get it all lined up. We'll go ahead and tighten these up. So once we have our tool tight, we're going to grab these two pieces out of our bearing puller set, thread them in on each side. Then take this piece, slide it down over top of these threads. You'll take your washers, put them down over top of each of the threads. Then you'll just want to thread these down. You don't have to tighten them. And then we're going to grab a 17 millimeter. We'll put it right here. We'll thread it down, then we'll take our impact. And just start tightening it up. Then our bearing will come free. Remove our nuts off of here. Remove that. Just want to inspect our bearing. Bearing's in good shape there. Then we're going to take our snap ring pliers and we're going to remove this snap ring. So we'll remove our snap ring. And there's going to be this washer right here. We'll pull our gear off. We'll pull this set of roller bearings, these needle bearings. We'll set our gear aside. And we're going to take the next snap ring off. Set it aside as well. We'll pull our hub off. All right, so we're going to set our factory hub aside. Now we're going to grab the hub that's included in the kit. So whenever you're looking at this, there's two ways that it can go together. There's a right way and there's a wrong way. The side that has the shorter nubs needs to face straight up like this. So we're going to slide that on there, get it all lined up. Then we're going to take our snap ring. We'll go ahead and get that reinstalled. Just want to make sure it sits down in this groove right here. Then we're going to take our washer, slide it down into place. So we're going to install our needles. Then we're going to install our needle bearing. Then we're going to take our new gear, install it just like this. You just want to make sure that it meshes up properly. We're going to take our washer, put it into place. And take our snap ring. You just want to go through and you want to make sure that your snap ring fully seats all the way around. So for this bearing right here, you're going to have to get a couple extensions and then your threaded ends. Start your nut, and then right here inside of the shaft, I'll show you on this shaft here, I actually took a bolt and stuck down inside of it. That way I'm not pressing inside of here, because if you try to take this press and shove it in there, it could potentially get stuck. So we just took a bolt, slid it in the hole, and then we're just going to go ahead and tighten it up. Pulls the bearing right off, no problem at all. So then we'll just loosen our tool and then just remove the bearing puller. So we've got this bearing off here. What we're going to do is we're just going to take it and slide it on the end of the shaft that we're going to be pressing it onto. That way we know where our bearings are, that way we don't get confused or anything like that. Then we're going to do the same thing for this opposite side, except we won't need as many extensions here. But essentially just remove the bearing the same way as you did the other two bearings. Now we're going to press our bearings onto our shafts. You want to make sure that you transferred your bearings off of your factory shaft to your new shaft here. So you have your small one on top, a little bit larger one on the bottom here. And then we'll have the one large bearing on top of this shaft. So let's head on over here to the press. The biggest thing is just to make sure that you have your bearings started on there nice and straight. We've already got our bearings started on there straight, and it's perfectly fine to press off of this bottom bearing. So we just have it laying on a good flat surface. You're gonna make sure you get something that fits on the inner race of the bearing. Just like anytime you're pressing a bearing on. We're just gonna go ahead and get it lined up and go ahead and press this bearing all the way on. So you're gonna make sure that it goes all the way down and that it fully seats onto the shaft. You're gonna make sure that the inner race on the bottom portion of the bearing is sitting on the shaft there. Ours is. Now we're gonna press our bearings onto our other shaft. So now it's time to start reassembling the transmission. You just wanna go through and make sure that all your bearings are still spinning good. All the ones that you just recently pressed on. All ours are nice and quiet, spinning nice and free. So we're gonna grab this gear right here, the one that we changed the lower gear out as well as the hub, and this gear right here. So this gear, whenever you change this hub out, you flipped it upside down. So now we're gonna flip it right side up so that the small bearing and the hub are facing towards the top. We're gonna grab this one so the big bearing's facing towards the top. What we're gonna do is we're gonna simultaneously put these in together. You have to put them in together, otherwise you're not gonna get it to work. So we got it in there. Now we're gonna grab the longer shaft here, the one where the secondary clutch is gonna go on. We're just gonna slide it right down. Just make sure you're careful on that seal. Don't wanna damage your seal there. So we got that in place. Make sure the gears are meshing properly. Now we're gonna grab our small idler gear. And it's gonna go in just like this. So now all the gears are meshed properly here. Another thing, you wanna make sure that you clean everything up. You know, if you have any debris, make sure you clean your transmission out, make sure everything's nice and clean before you reassemble it, because there's no better time to do it. Then we're gonna take our shift shaft here. We're gonna get it lined up, both of our hubs on the top and the bottom. Then you want to pick up on the shaft just like this. It has a spring on it. Then once you get it lined up with the hole, it'll just drop right back in. Just like that. We're going to grab our shift drum. We're going to make sure that this portion of it is facing this way. And you'll just want to pick up your selector here. Make sure everything lines up properly. You have to rotate it around a little bit. It should drop right into place. Make sure everything's lined up. Make sure nothing's making any contact. Make sure it's fully seated. Looks like ours is good to go. Let's go through, inspect everything. Make sure there's no contact anywhere with any of the gears. Where it shouldn't be. Obviously we want them to be gear to gear, but make sure like this gear right here isn't riding on this gear, so on and so forth. Just go through, just for example, make sure that this gear right here isn't riding on this right here. Make sure they're meshing up properly. Our transmission looks like it's all good. We're just gonna spin it. Like it's good to go there. So now we're gonna go ahead and start reassembling the transmission. Next, we're gonna go through and make sure that our case is completely clean, where it's gonna match up with the other half. We've already done this, so what we're gonna do is take some gray silicone. You wanna make sure that you use gray because it has the highest oil resistance. So then we're just gonna take our silicone, apply a small bead all the way around. Make sure when you're reinstalling all of your bolts that you put a little bit of silicone on each of the threads. And go ahead and reinstall them. Then whatever excess silicone comes out, whenever you run the bolts down to touch the case half, you wipe off. Now we're gonna go ahead and reinstall all our components that are gonna attach to the shift drum. The first piece we're gonna grab is gonna be the small gear with the 1 dot on that gear right there. And all these are master keyed, so what we're gonna do is find the spline that has the larger diameter, line it up, and it'll just drop right in just like that. And we're gonna take this gear right here and we're gonna line these 2 dots up with the 1 dot on this gear. So it should look just like this. And as long as you have the flat on the shift drum facing towards the Polaris, everything should line up properly. However, you do want to double check, just to make sure that your dots are lined up. And we're going to take this piece right here where our shifter is going to attach. We're going to line it up with the splined portion, just like that. We're going to line this up on the large spline, just like we did. So it should look just like this. Should have the piece where your shifter is going to attach, just like that, whenever it's all assembled. And the next thing we're going to do is grab our spring. We're going to take our spring and loop it onto this notch right here on this arm. And whenever you're doing this, be careful. You want to push the spring down onto the case just like that in that groove. So at this point, yours should look just like this. Once we've done that, we're going to make sure that this portion is clean, which is going to be what seals the case up here on the top. And then this around here is all clean. And we're going to grab our silicone. We're just going to put a small bead, an even lesser bead than we put around the actual case. Smear it around there. Just to make sure it coats it. Like I said, you don't want a big bead. And you can just kind of go through and smooth this out up here. You can use a glove or you can just use your finger. Either way, you just don't want a bunch to get down in here, so if there's any on this lip, just kind of take your finger and just wipe it off. Make sure your hands are clean every time after you do it. That way you're not smearing it all right back down in there. Just gonna go through, make sure we don't have any on this spring, anything like that. So we got a good clean edge there. Hands wiped off. Then we're gonna go ahead and line everything back up. Should just go just like this. It'll all slip right into place. May have to wiggle it around just a little bit. Sometimes it likes to get stuck right here. Just go down, push it all down. Make sure you got a good little bit of silicone smashing out of there. Like I said, you don't want a ton. And we're gonna take all of our hardware. It secures this cap on. We're just gonna take a little bit of silicone again. You know, nothing too crazy. Just a little dot right there. Just make sure your holes are lined up good and straight. Then just start all the hardware before you tighten it. Then after we get them all silicone down, we'll let this sit for a minute, just like we did on the case half. And then we'll go ahead and we'll torque them to factory spec. Now we're gonna install our shift lever. We're gonna make sure that we line up the big spline on the lever with the big spline right here. Make sure that you have it oriented properly. A lot of times you can tell, you know, because where you had to kind of pry on it to get it off of there, you'll see where you kind of marred it up a little bit. So we'll just slide it down on there as far as we can get it. And then a lot of times I like to just take a socket that's a little bit bigger, give it a couple taps. That way we know it's all the way down. We'll take our nut, thread it back on there. We'll go ahead and tighten that. Then we're gonna take our sensor, and it only goes on one way. There's no way to put it on wrong. So we're just gonna put it on just like this right here. And then we'll go ahead and put our wave spring on, and then our clip. Now it's time to reinstall our transmission. So we're just gonna grab it. I'm gonna slide it down into place, just as we removed it. Make sure that all your wiring and everything's out of the way. Then you'll just want to get it slid somewhat to where it's going to be. Obviously, we're going to have to move it around. So right there's about how you want to start. You just want to get it put in there and push it towards the passenger side of the machine. And then we're going to grab our mount, and we'll just go ahead and remove all the hardware from it. Go ahead and take our nuts off of each of these studs. We'll go ahead and attach this to the rear portion of the frame where we removed it from. Go ahead and get all of our nuts started. So next we're going to grab one piece of our mount and slide the bolts through the transmission. So we're going to line these two holes up with these two holes on the transmission. We're just gonna slide our plate in. And once our plate's in there, we're gonna take our bolts. Just pop them through the holes there. We got a little bit of silicone in our holes, which the bolts will push through it. Sometimes you just got to kind of thread them around a little bit. Maybe pull them out and then push them through on the opposite side as well. You just want to get these two bolts through. There we go. All right, so those two bolts are through. Now we're going to go over to the opposite side, and we're going to take our threaded plate, and we're going to get it lined up, and we're going to start our bolts that we previously just pushed to the transmission here. So a lot of times you can just kind of put the threaded plate on the threads of your bolt, then reach around to the opposite side, or have somebody help you. And just get your bolts started into this threaded plate here. So like I said, we're just gonna start them. You don't wanna tighten anything just yet until we get our transmission completely mounted up. So we have those two bolts started. Now you're gonna notice that your transmission is quite a bit lower than the mount. So what you can do is take a pry bar on the back side of this transmission, and the bolt that we're gonna wanna get in first is gonna be the larger M10 bolt that's gonna go through the actual mount that we just attached to the frame. We're gonna take our pry bar, pick up our transmission, and as you're picking up, you may have to wiggle it back. Just gotta do whatever you gotta do to get it lined up. So that bolt will go in. And you may have to come over here to the opposite side. Just kind of pick it up a little bit over here as well. And as you're picking up, push that bolt through or have somebody help you. In this instance, we got our camera guy, Kemper, helping us out. And then we'll go ahead and get our nut started. So once we have that one attached, we're gonna grab this bolt right here that has your washer on it, and we're gonna get it started through the bushing and through the bracket. So same thing, you just wanna put your pry bar in there, pick up on this transmission, next, we're going to grab one of our long bolts that attaches the transmission to the motor. Normally it'd be facing this side, so it'd be coming from the driver's side to the passenger side. We're going to flip it around and push it through the passenger side to the driver's side to help us hold the transmission to the motor. That way it makes it easier to get our prop shaft on or in our clutch cover, everything. So we're just going to put a pry bar underneath the transmission here. We're just going to kind of wiggle it around until we get it lined up with this mount. We're going to go ahead and grab our prop shaft hardware. We'll go ahead and get our prop shaft reinstalled to the transmission. So now that we have our motor and transmission coupled together with the one bolt, you know, kind of holding everything in place. We're gonna go ahead and take our inner clutch cover, slide it back into position. Whenever you go to put this on, you want to make sure you're not pinching any wires. Make sure there's no wires back in behind the inner clutch cover. And then as you can see, we're still a little bit off of alignment here. So in this case, what you're gonna have to do is kind of wrestle the transmission back a little bit. Just kind of pry up on the transmission. Just kind of wiggle it around until we can see our holes. Alright, I can see daylight through a couple of these holes here. The ones that are going to take these smaller of the two bolts on the secondary side of the clutch cover. Just going to go ahead and slide them all the way through. We got those two bolts through there. Alright. Now we're going to take our other long bolt. Feed it through. And it may not go all the way through, but as long as it goes through the transmission, we'll have to line it up on the opposite side. Then we're going to come over here to our motor. We're going to see what we got to do to line up some of these holes. So I got a hole lined up right here, and it's going to be for the Torx headed bolt. So we're just going to kind of wiggle everything with the pry bar until we get it lined up. You know, we don't want to force anything. You know, again, you want to make sure that there's no wires caught in between the clutch cover and the engine or the transmission. You know, something's going together real hard, or a bolt's not wanting to thread in easy, you know, you just need to stop. The one thing about the turbos, if you cross thread a bolt, it's directly into the motor, so it's gonna be a pretty big ordeal. It's not something you're gonna want to deal with, especially this close to being done. Then just continue to line up all the holes and get all the bolts installed, but do not fully tighten anything just yet. So at this point, we have all the hardware on the primary side of the inner clutch cover tightened. So all 6 bolts over here tight. None of these bolts over here are tight. They're all just started. We have all the nuts started on the back sides. We're gonna wanna tighten the 2 larger bolts. So this one as well as this one. So what we're gonna do, the lower one's the easier one to get to. This one's kind of tricky to get to. So what I like to do is take my wrench. We'll put our wrench on this side. And we're gonna grab our socket for the opposite side. We'll run this up till it's about tight. And you can kind of see where it was from the factory, you know, where the bolt was laying. So we're gonna run it up to that point. We're gonna try to get it as close as possible to where it was before we took it apart. So we're gonna go ahead, make sure our alignment's correct. Get it lined up and then tighten it. Then we'll go ahead and tighten this bolt right here as well. You have to pull your hoses up out of the way, pull them to the side, get your socket on there, then come over here with your wrench. hold it in place. Get it tight. Then we're going to come back here to our motor mount where our 3 screws are. Our 3 studs are sticking through the machine. We're going to go ahead and tighten all these up. Once these 3 studs right here are tight, then go through, fully tighten all the hardware, and reinstall your wiring. Now you're going to want to go through, double check all your hardware, make sure everything's fully tightened, make sure nothing's making any contact anywhere that it shouldn't be. Then you're going to want to make sure your fill plug's tightened, fill the transmission up, reinstall your clutches, put your belt on, reinstall your suspension, and that's how easy it is to install SuperATV's high gear on a Polaris RZR Turbo. For more information on this high gear or any of SuperATV's great products, feel free to give us a call at 855-743-3427 or check us out online at superatv.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.